When it comes to where you operate your business, there are a lot of factors to consider, from the location of the space to the type of space, even the length of term. Fortunately, small business owners have a number of options to choose from, including traditional commercial office space to service office space solutions, such as Howard Corporate Center. So how do you know what option is best for you and your business? We'll address that on today's show and other tips to keep in mind when choosing commercial office space for your business. Welcome to C-Suite on Your Street, a show where we talk about what you need to know to start, run, and grow your small business. I'm LaTanya Howard, your host and a fellow small business owner of Howard Corporate Center right here in the city of Laurel. On this program, we speak with entrepreneurs and experts on a wide range of business topics. Our goal, to share resources, tips, and tricks to help you operate and think like a CEO, wherever you are on your entrepreneurial journey. Today's guest is Will Ferguson, a business broker and commercial real estate agent licensed in Maryland and Washington, D.C. As an entrepreneur himself, Mr. Ferguson uses his knowledge to help business owners negotiate and secure commercial real estate transactions to move their business forward. Today, Mr. Ferguson will share his insights on what small business owners ought to consider when pursuing commercial real estate for their business. Mr. Ferguson, welcome to the show.
Thank you, LaTanya. I appreciate being invited.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So we're going to talk about a lot today, an important topic for small business owners, where and how to house their business. But first, tell us a little bit about your background and what got you to the role that you have now in commercial real estate.
Well, I'm originally from Maryland. I grew up in Baltimore. And, when I was in school, I've always thought about owning a business, things like having a paper route and cleaning houses. Those were always things that I attempted to do as the oldest of four boys to kind of have some extra money and create my own destiny. Mm-hmm. So as I got older and I realized that those things that I pursued were productive, they taught me skills, they helped me build a network. I decided to get into real estate, and for my own purposes, I invested in multifamily property. And I did this in combination with working full time, so it was a full schedule, but it was, again, a very big learning cycle, and it was productive and profitable. And then about 8 years ago, my mentor and I were having a conversation, and he said, Will, you need to consider business brokerage and commercial real estate. I'd never considered commercial real estate because I thought it was for the big guys, the old guys, the established players in the market. But my mentor assured me that I could play in this space, and I had the skills and the patience and the intelligence to do a good job for my clients. So I pursued it, and here I am.
Okay, awesome. Mm-hmm. So tell us very quickly the difference between a business broker and a commercial real estate agent.
That's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked, because sometimes people collapse the two. So a commercial real estate agent is primarily going to work in the space of looking at real estate for business use, for rental, for investment. But a business broker is going to look at valuating a business and helping a business owner sell or prepare to sell or to purchase, to grow through acquisition, only looking at the assets of the business. So the real estate may be in there, but in general, most of the time it is not.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. So, of course, today we're talking about commercial real estate, particularly what small business owners need to keep in mind. And there's really a lot for them to consider that we're going to cover today. But let's start first with the types of commercial office spaces that are out there. One of the ones that I'm particularly familiar with, because I lease this type of commercial office space, is the office categorization of commercial space.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in the office space, you typically will have ratings, basically qualities of space, and it has to do primarily with the age of the construction and the amenities involved. So you'll have in the office space a class A, B, and C category. Mm-hmm. C category being an older stock, less of an open floor plan, if we can use that concept, less amenities like security and some of the things that the tenant may have to bear. Where an older, or excuse me, a newer facility like a type A facility will typically be something that's built by a major developer. It'll be energy efficient. It'll have either an open floor plan or floor plan that has the ability to be redesigned for the use. And it'll provide some amenities like maybe a cafe or a business center or a shared conference room, those type of things.
Okay, and the office space categorization itself, this is typically for business to business types of operations like your accounting professions and perhaps consultants. Any type of business to business is usually the type of business operation that you'll see in the office categorization. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. A lot of people forget about things like engineering firms, architectural firms. They forget about even a mature photographer, which may have a studio and have additional staff. There's a lot of different companies, law offices, a lot of different companies that can utilize office space and want to because they have the benefit of A, an established address, B, sometimes their work, their contracts require them to have an office, and then they have the privacy and the separation from home and work.
Right. Okay, excellent. Now, another type of commercial space is medical office space. Tell us a little bit about that.
When you look at medical space, you're looking at people like dentists, dermatologists, you're looking at people that need water. So typically these suites are set up where there's more plumbing in the building in general. Typically you'll find that they have access to off-hour access because typically a medical professional may see clients on the weekends. And you're going to find things like maybe a heavier source of electricity. For example, if there's 2 treatment rooms. So a medical suite typically is going to cost more, but it's going to have more kind of bones, more amenities that help the professional do their job.
Okay, excellent. So another type of commercial office space is retail commercial office space. And this is one that people probably are most familiar with in terms of seeing, because when you go to a strip mall or some other type of outdoor facility, a lot of times it's a retail type of space. Tell us about that.
Sure. You know, most people, when they think about retail, they think about their grocery store, they think about Starbucks. All right. But, you know, retail also comes in different sizes and shapes. There's what we would call a Class A type retail, brand new strip center. There's Class B, there's Class C, the little small strip centers that are older stock. But in essence, when you look at a retail space, there's a few things you want to be aware of. Number one, there's limited parking for most of the smaller non-anchor type tenants. So if you're not a Giant Food, you're going to have a limitation on your parking.
Right.
The second thing is, in the retail environment, the landlords have the tenants pay the majority of the expenses. So if you're in an office environment, you may have a shared relationship with the landlord, but typically in the retail environment, you're paying for taxes, insurance, you're paying for maintenance, commonly known as common area maintenance. You're paying for all of that, snow removal, trash, all of that's in your bill.
Okay, very good. And then the last 2 categories are flex and industrial types of commercial office space. Tell us about those.
Okay, so flex industrial, I like to put those together. Those are spaces where someone's going to have a business where they need maybe an office, maybe a little kitchenette, maybe a bathroom, but the primary use for their space is going to be warehousing of products or services. So you think of people like siding companies, you think of people like Chimney and the people that provide those type of things that want showrooms, new kitchen, people that sell those type of products and services, plumbers. When you think about industrial, you go actually to another level. And industrial does not have to have any built-in office use. It can primarily be used to house either a manufacturing process or, again, just simply house storage like rug distributors, those type of things.
Okay, great. So we've talked about office, medical, retail, flex, and industrial types of commercial office space. So what you've helped our viewers to understand is a starting point for them to decide what type of office space they need to pursue is the type of business that they're running. Because a
Absolutely.
lot of times that will drive the type of space that they have.
Absolutely.
All right, so now something else that small business owners ought to consider in their commercial office space search is the type of lease.
Right.
That they need to pursue. And sometimes this is based on the type of space too. So let's first talk about full service leases.
Okay. So in a full service lease, the benefit there is you know what your monthly expenses are going to be. Because inside of that lease, you're going to have things like utilities, you're going to have things like taxes, insurance. So you're not going to have any unknown items that could really throw your budget off, especially if your budget is cyclical. You want to have that predictability. So in a lot of cases, the full service lease makes a lot of sense. However, one of the disadvantages is a lot of times they control those things. They control the utilities. So if you're going to be working off hours, anything outside of Monday through Friday, you may not have access to the thermostat.
Right.
And so those things need to be calculated as far as the type of business you have and the type of foot traffic you're going to have. What was the second part of your question?
No, that I think you covered it, but I think a thing to point out is that oftentimes it's the office type of commercial office space that has the full service lease. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Okay. So let's talk now about the modified gross type of lease.
Okay. These are leases I like because they represent a shared commitment between the landlord and the tenant. So sometimes the landlord will start off with a premise, and the premise is what I want to collect in my lease is I want to collect the base rent, I want to collect taxes, I want to collect insurance, and then the rest of the items are negotiable.
Okay.
But whether they start off with a base premise or whether they leave it open to be negotiated, the reality is you're not paying all of the expenses based on a prorated share of your space that you're using. And so that allows you to benefit from, for example, if we don't get a lot of snow, there's not a lot of salt and shovel fees that you're going to pay. That allows you to better control the utilities, because typically in a modified gross, you're going to be in charge of the utilities. So it gives you some latitude, and it also reduces your monthly expense because you may be billed for those other items either quarterly or annually.
Okay. And what type of commercial space typically has a modified gross type of lease attached to it?
Typically, I would say an older stock type of property. So it could be some office, it could be office medical, it could be some flex warehouse spaces. It could be those type of spaces where there's some longevity in the property, and therefore what the owner's trying to create is a nice environment for a wider selection of tenants.
Okay, awesome. All right, and then the third type of lease, least common type of lease, is triple net lease. Okay, tell us a little bit about the triple net lease.
So the triple net lease is designed to actually give the biggest return to the landlord.
Okay.
And so you will find the strip centers and triple net leases represented by, they call it real estate investment trusts. And these are these big companies that buy these shopping malls all across the country. But in essence, what's happening is the tenant's responsible based on their prorated share of space. They're responsible for everything. So it's HVAC maintenance, it's snow, salt, trash, it's everything that occurs in the space. And when those expenses go up, they also are responsible for a percentage of those increases.
Okay. So it sounds like the full service lease provides the most predictability in terms of budgeting, and the triple net maybe provides a little bit less predictability.
That's absolutely
But a little
correct.
bit more control, maybe to some extent, over some of the expenses. Is that?
Well, it allows you to have really a showcase type facility, because most of your retail spots are very, very popular.
Okay.
Your national franchise companies want to be there, your Subways, your Starbucks, and anybody that's looking for foot traffic wants to be where the lights are bright and people feel like they can walk to your location. So what you're really paying for there is access and visibility.
Okay, very good point, very good point. So you've told us about the commercial leases again, and then also the types of leases, but you say that there are 4 other factors that are important for small business owners to keep in mind as well, beyond the type of space and the type of lease. And the first one is the security deposit.
Right.
You know, one of the 4 factors. Why is that something that those searching for a commercial office space ought to keep in mind?
If you've never had a commercial relationship, it's going to be important to understand that in the commercial world, the landlord gets to determine what type of security they want. So it's not traditional, like when you rent a house or an apartment, it typically asks for 1 month's rent. Okay? In the commercial world, they can ask for a personal guarantee. They can ask for several months' rent.
Okay.
I've seen people pay as much as 6 months' rent up front,
Right.
based on the risks that the landlord or property owner had determined.
Okay.
So it's important to be able to go into a scenario with the mindset that this security deposit won't be what I think it's going to be.
Right.
It'll be based on how the landlord reviews my business plan and my financials.
Okay, and you mentioned a very important term, personal guarantee. Tell us a little bit about what that is.
So a personal guarantee, in essence, removes the protection you would have from a corporate entity like an LLC, or an S corp, and basically says that if your business fails, you now personally owe us, and we're going to come after you for your lease obligation, whatever's remaining.
Right.
So that could be an attachment to your house, that could be an attachment to a retirement account. It's something that is on top of your typical responsibility.
Right.
So it's important to be aware that sometimes is required, and the next question is, are you prepared to make that commitment?
Absolutely, absolutely. So a second factor that those searching for a commercial office space ought to consider is the assignment capabilities of the lease. Tell us a little bit about why that's important and what that means.
So in the retail space, there's a lot of different businesses that have turnover with employees or contractors. So we think about the hair salon business, we think about the massage business, we think about barbers, we think about any business that will bring on additional talent. And so you want to be able to have those folks join your practice, help grow your practice without having to redo a lease every time that happens. So having the ability to assign your lease gives you that flexibility. But the other piece is, if in fact your business is failing and you've been prompt on your rent and you want to have a real life conversation with your landlord, which will allow you to reduce your liability, you want to have the ability to assign the lease to someone else that the landlord picks. You may bring them to the table, but the landlord will pick them and verify their credentials.
Okay, that's good information to have. A third factor is the rent escalator. Tell us a little bit about that.
So again, when we look at typical residential leases, people think, well, I'll do this 1-year lease and then we'll see what the rent is next month. And typically the rent, either stays the same or it goes up by a nominal amount. Well, there are built-in escalators in the commercial leases, and the landlords want to make sure that they're being covered for increases in property taxes, insurance, vendor costs like trash removal. So those escalators can be as minute as 2%, but as high as 5% a year. So if you're signing up for a 5-year or a 10-year lease, those escalators can get you to a number that you may not be prepared for.
Right. And then the fourth factor that you suggest that small business owners consider is termination privileges.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the thing that you want to be concerned of in the termination area is how much time, how much notice do you need to give the landlord? Because if the landlord says, I can terminate your lease in 30 days, how are you going to reorganize your business in 30 days?
Right.
So I believe in creating as long a runway as possible so you can have a termination notice that allows you to regroup if in fact the landlord decides to terminate you or you decide to terminate the lease. Okay. And the second part of that is, what do we do with the rest of this obligation? Absolutely. How is that handled?
Okay, excellent. So what we've been talking about so far are traditional commercial office space options, but there are also non-traditional commercial office space offerings out there in the marketplace too that you as a broker can potentially help small business owners to navigate. And one of those is service office space. Of course, I'm very familiar with this particular
Right.
space because that's one of my business offerings. But you can also help businesses with the service office space option. And this is something that small business owners ought to consider, because if they aren't able to provide a personal guarantee or do not want to, or the security deposit is a bit steep for them, they can still potentially have a professional environment to operate their business and then eventually work their way up to the traditional commercial office space. So can you tell us anything about what your experience has been with service office space or non-traditional office space offerings as well?
Absolutely. So that's one of the reasons why you want to have a relationship with a commercial real estate agent, and preferably a commercial real estate agent and a business broker, because they're going to look at how you use the space differently.
Exactly.
And one of the reasons for having that relationship is it's about your business, not about their interests.
Exactly.
So they're going to help you figure out, hey, maybe this space is better because I have a professional receptionist. I have the energy of other business people that I can ultimately network with. I have the ability to host events that I couldn't host in my home, or I would pay more in a rental environment. I have the ability to have the privacy and separate home from business. So there's a lot of reasons to look at what I call an incubator space or a starter space, because it gives you the right platform to then build your business to the next level.
Right, absolutely. And I'm one to suggest that people should always search the marketplace. And of course, working with a real estate agent helps people to do that, because as lay people, there are certain resources and information that we simply can't access that a broker can.
That's
or
correct.
a real estate agent can. But I am a strong advocate of people just navigating the marketplace. That's one of the things I talk about in my book, which focuses on the pros and cons of service office space. But I say that to say that even though service office space is a good alternative to consider, it's not going to work for everyone. Like a medical business, for example, service office space may not necessarily provide the
Correct.
electricity or the water that they need to run their business. You talked about retail. A lot of times the retail space is for franchisees to build their space, and service office space may not be a good solution for that.
Correct.
So service office space may or may not work for you, but it's a good idea to consider all commercial office space alternatives that are out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you've touched on this already, but considering everything that we've talked about, the different types of office space, the different classes of office space, the different leases, and the spectrum of cost that it could cost to have an office space, why is it important, you think, for small businesses to work with a broker instead of trying to go it alone?
I think it's important because there's a few things that have to be understood. In the commercial world, there's a certain pace at which the commercial agents work at. And it's a lot slower than your residential experience. So understanding how they work is important. Understanding the language that they use, understanding that your agent will probably know them and therefore you'll get a better response time. All of those things are important. But the other thing that's important is this. You want somebody that has your best interests in mind. If you're talking to an agent just off of a listing, you're talking to an agent that's representing someone.
Right.
All right?
Right.
And so you have to figure out what's your best interest. And then you want to have a long-term relationship with that person, because as your business grows, you're going to need assistance down the road. You, of course, are going to learn more about leases, but the question is, are you going to have the time, all right? And are you going to have the energy to pursue lease conversations and purchase conversations when you have a business to run?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are two types of people who I often come across in my business. You have people who, they might get on LoopNet or some type of resource that is available to the general public. They see a listing and they call the broker, and if they feel that the broker is really nice and very helpful, they forget the fact, like you said, that broker is working for the landlord, not for you. So you do need to have someone who's representing your own interest. And sometimes people don't realize that just because someone is being cooperative, their loyalty is not to you, their loyalty is to the landlord. Another bit of feedback that I often hear from people is that, well, I don't want to get my own broker because it's going to cost me so much money. But that's not necessarily true most of the time, because the commission is typically paid by the landlord, at least in a tenant type of situation. Is that fair to
correct.
say?
90% of the time, the compensation that I would be receiving is paid for by the landlord.
Right.
So having you be concerned about that is an unrealistic concern. The real concern should be is, what type of value can I get for my lease arrangement
Right.
or my purchase arrangement, and how does that equate to whatever exposure you have with me?
Right.
All right, and most of the time, what I've found in 100% of the cases, that either the tenant trying to acquire new space or the person looking at trying to sell or lease their space, depending on who I'm representing, they've always found that the value has exceeded the expense.
Right, right. And some of the pain points that you mentioned earlier, a high security deposit, a personal guarantee, high rent escalators or frequent rent escalators. These are the types of things that a broker who's representing your interest can help to negotiate.
Absolutely.
And get down to a more manageable cost point for you.
That's correct. And it can save you a ton of time because in some of the best places that everybody wants to be, the tenants that are already there have protections. They are called lockout clauses where you can't bring in another like business. And so all of those things will save you a lot of time from looking at all the pretty shiny places
Right.
that may not allow you to even be considered.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. This has been extremely helpful information, and what we like to do at the end of each show is to provide some action items that our viewers can take today to put everything that we've talked about into action. So some of the action items that we've talked about, one of which is do an internet search for commercial office space terms. Why do you recommend that?
I think you want to get familiar with the terms before you talk with an agent, so that way you feel confident in what they're talking about when they look at spaces.
Right.
Now, a good agent will use layman terms and will show you why these terms are important, which is more important than knowing the terms. It's
Right.
knowing why they're important and how they're used. But at the end of the day, you want to have some basis to have a conversation with a commercial agent.
Okay, that's a good recommendation. Another recommendation is consider working with an agent when you're ready to pursue a lease, preferably in the 3 to 6 month time frame.
I would say if you have your business plan together, if you have your finances together, 3 to 6 months is a good time frame. If those two things aren't in place, and it doesn't have to be a 20-page business plan, it could be a 2 or 3-page business essay. So
Right.
you're organized as far as where your customers are coming from, what your critical mass needs to be, and what type of money you need to make to pay the rent. If you're not organized that way, then you need to look at a longer time frame. And maybe it's a 2-year conversation
Right.
to start the conversation, to have this agent provide you resources and give you ideas, not search for spaces, but help you prepare.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, a third action item is to visit the Maryland Real Estate Commission website just to learn more about the process and what your rights are in the state of Maryland.
Absolutely. And every state differs. And so you want to get familiar with what your rights are in Maryland. All right, you want to ask your agent what your rights are. A lot of times, like you're saying, people will make a connection with someone. They'll like that person, but then they don't back up and say, okay, what rights and privileges do you have? What rights and privileges do I have? And really define the relationship. So I think that's important for people to be, again, confident in where they stand. And that includes how long the engagement should last.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a year. It could be a 2-month engagement. It could be a 4-month engagement.
Right.
It needs to fit whatever your purposes are.
Okay, awesome. And then a bonus tip is to consider service office space and then graduate to your own lease if you're not yet ready. And that might be something that happens during the due diligence phase that you just mentioned.
Absolutely.
After you and your broker talk, it may be discovered that maybe service office space is a better starting point for you. And let's talk about traditional space maybe 1 or 2 years down the road. Yep. Okay.
Absolutely.
And of course, my book, Kill the Rent, Grow Your Biz, talks a lot about service office space and some of the very points that we talked about today. So that's an excellent resource for those considering service office space. Okay. Well, you provide, once again, very helpful information today. I even learned a few things, and I like to think that I already know a lot. So do you have any closing thoughts or remarks before we wrap up?
Well, I will say this. I'm always willing to have a conversation and schedule a consultation free of charge to anyone that's in the business of looking to lease or purchase real estate and or a business, because sometimes that is a quicker step to getting them to be successful. And then the other piece is I have tools and resources as well. I highly recommend your book, but there's other books when it comes to how they form their business, what they should be considering when they form their business, who should be on their team, like their CPA, their insurance agent. All of those things are good to talk about. And again, I have no problem sharing those resources with anybody that decides just to have a simple conversation with me.
Very good. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been extremely helpful.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
You're welcome. And thank you for tuning in to C-Suite on Your Street. Please tune in again next time to learn more about how to start, run, and grow your small business. And be sure to connect with us on Facebook at C-Suite on Your Street. Until then, I'd like to share our quote of the month. If you don't create change, change will create you. Take care.